In the grey morning light of October 31st, 1944, 18 British de Havilland Mosquito fighter bombers streaked across the North Sea at wave-top height, their twin Merlin engines pushing them toward the coast of occupied Denmark at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. These aircraft, among the most advanced and versatile combat planes of World War II, were undertaking one of the most daring and precisely planned precision bombing missions of the entire war, an operation that would test the limits of low-level navigation, bombing accuracy, and the courage of crews who would attack a target in the heart of a major European city with full knowledge that any error could result in massive civilian casualties. The target was Shell House in Copenhagen, a 6-story office building that the German Gestapo had requisitioned and converted into their Danish headquarters office building, a fortress of terror from which the Nazi secret police coordinated the suppression of Danish resistance, the interrogation and torture of captured patriots, and the administration of occupation policies designed to crush any opposition to German rule. Intelligence reports indicated that the building held not only Gestapo officers and their records, but also imprisoned Danish resistance fighters held in cells on the top floor, men and women who faced torture and execution but who might be freed if the building could be destroyed with sufficient precision to kill their captors, while giving the prisoners a chance to escape. The mission represented everything the Mosquito had been designed to accomplish: the marriage of speed, range, precision, and striking power in an aircraft that could penetrate enemy airspace, deliver its weapons with extraordinary accuracy, and escape before defenses could respond effectively. To understand the significance of this mission and the context that made it necessary, we must examine the situation in occupied Denmark in late 1944, the nature of the Gestapo's operations in Copenhagen, the capabilities and characteristics of the Mosquito aircraft, and the planning process that converted intelligence information into a detailed operational plan, requiring split-second timing and pinpoint accuracy. Denmark had fallen to German invasion on April 9, 1940, in an operation that lasted less than 6 hours and resulted in Danish capitulation, with minimal fighting. The Danish government, recognizing the futility of military resistance against overwhelming German forces, had chosen to negotiate terms that preserved Danish sovereignty to the greatest extent possible under occupation. This policy of cooperation and accommodation, while controversial, allowed Denmark to maintain its government, police force, and many domestic institutions throughout the early years of the war. However, by 1943 the situation had deteriorated significantly as Danish resistance to the occupation grew more active and German authorities responded with increasingly harsh measures. The Danish resistance movement, which had begun as scattered acts of individual defiance and sabotage, evolved into a sophisticated underground network that conducted intelligence-gathering sabotage operations against German military installations and Danish factories producing goods for the German war effort, and the facilitation of escape routes for Jews and Allied airmen shot down over Denmark. The resistance published underground newspapers, maintained communication with the British Special Operations Executive, and received weapons, explosives and supplies by airdrops and sea landings. As resistance activities increased throughout 1943 and 1944, the Germans responded by imposing martial law, dissolving the Danish government, and turning security operations over to the Gestapo, the Geheime Staatspolizei or secret state police that functioned as the primary instrument of Nazi terror throughout occupied Europe. The Gestapo in Denmark operated with the same brutal efficiency that characterized its operations elsewhere in occupied territories. Resistance members who were captured faced interrogation that routinely included torture designed to extract information about other resistance members, weapons caches, safe houses, and planned operations. The Gestapo employed professional interrogators who used both psychological pressure and physical torture to break prisoners. Methods included beatings, extended periods of standing or other stress positions, water torture, electrical shocks, and other techniques designed to cause maximum pain and psychological trauma. Prisoners who survived interrogation faced execution or deportation to concentration camps in Germany, where survival rates were minimal. The Gestapo also maintained extensive files on suspected resistance members, sympathizers, and anyone else deemed potentially hostile to German interests. These records, compiled through informants, surveillance, intercepted communications, and interrogation of captured resistance members, represented a comprehensive intelligence database that posed an existential threat to the resistance network. Shell House, the building the Gestapo requisitioned for its Copenhagen headquarters, was a modern office building located in the city center that had been constructed before the war as commercial office space. The building stood 6 stories tall with a basement, constructed of reinforced concrete with brick facades, typical of urban commercial architecture of the 1930s. The Gestapo selected this building specifically because its location, size, and construction made it suitable for their operational requirements. The ground floors housed administrative offices where Gestapo officers coordinated security operations throughout Denmark. The middle floors contained interrogation rooms, offices for record-keeping and intelligence analysis, and living quarters for some Gestapo personnel. The top floor, critically, had been converted into a prison, where the Gestapo held resistance members awaiting interrogation, trial, or execution. These prisoners, kept in cells or small rooms, represented some of the most valuable intelligence assets the resistance possessed. Men and women who knew the identities of other resistance members, the locations of safe houses and weapons caches, and details of planned operations. The psychological pressure on these prisoners was immense, as they knew that every day they remained in Gestapo custody brought them closer to torture, forced confession, and the potential betrayal of their comrades. By late 1944, the situation had become desperate enough that Danish resistance leaders, in communication with British intelligence through established channels, requested assistance in dealing with the shell house problem. The resistance proposed a bombing raid that would destroy the building, kill or scatter the Gestapo personnel, destroy the intelligence files, and potentially allow imprisoned resistance members to escape in the chaos following the attack. This was an extraordinary request that highlighted both the desperation of the situation and the confidence the resistance placed in British precision bombing capabilities. A conventional bombing raid by heavy bombers flying at high altitude would almost certainly destroy Shell House, but would also cause massive civilian casualties in the surrounding densely populated urban area, and would likely kill all the prisoners held on the top floor. What the resistance requested required something far more sophisticated, a precision low-level attack by aircraft capable of placing bombs directly on target, with minimal collateral damage. The mission was assigned to aircraft and crews from the Royal Air Force's 2nd Tactical Air Force, specifically squadrons operating the de Havilland Mosquito fighter bomber. The Mosquito represented one of the most successful and versatile aircraft designs of World War II, a twin-engine aircraft, constructed primarily of wood, that combined the speed of a fighter with the payload capacity of a light bomber. The aircraft had been conceived in 1938 by the de Havilland Company as a high-speed unarmed bomber that would rely on speed and altitude to evade enemy fighters rather than defensive armament and armor. This radical concept faced skepticism from Air Ministry officials who believed that bombers required heavy defensive armament, but eventually the design was approved and prototype construction began in 1940. The Mosquito that emerged from this development program exceeded even the optimistic expectations of its designers. The aircraft was powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered the legendary Spitfire fighter, giving the Mosquito a maximum speed of approximately 380 miles per hour at altitude, and over 300 miles per hour at low level. This speed made the Mosquito faster than most contemporary fighters, allowing it to outrun pursuing aircraft rather than fight them. The wooden construction, initially seen as a disadvantage, proved to have several benefits. Wood was not subject to the same wartime material shortages as aluminum, allowing Mosquito production to proceed without competing with other aircraft programs for scarce metals. The wooden construction also made the aircraft relatively easy to repair, as battle damage could often be fixed by skilled carpenters rather than specialized aircraft technicians. The Mosquito could carry a bomb load of up to 4,000 pounds in various configurations, though typical loads for precision missions were somewhat lighter to preserve performance and handling characteristics. The Mosquito's cockpit accommodated a crew of 2, a pilot and a navigator bombardier. The pilot, seated on the left, controlled the aircraft and handled all flying duties. The navigator bombardier, seated on the right, was responsible for navigation to and from the target, operation of the bomb site and bomb release mechanisms, and defensive observation to warn the pilot of threats. The close cooperation between pilot and navigator was essential to mission success, particularly on precision low-level attacks where navigation had to be exact and weapons delivery required coordination between aircraft handling and bomb release timing. Mosquito crews developed extraordinary teamwork through intensive training, learning to function almost as a single organism in the high-stress environment of combat operations. For the Shell House mission, designated Operation Carthage in operational planning documents, the aircraft selected were Mosquito FBMK-6 fighter bomber variants, equipped with 4 500-pound bombs each, carried in internal bomb bays. The 500-pound general-purpose bomb was a compromise between explosive power and structural characteristics that allowed it to penetrate buildings before detonating. These bombs featured instantaneous fuses that would detonate the weapon immediately upon impact, or slight delay fuses that allowed the bomb to penetrate through floors or walls before exploding inside the structure. The selection of fuses was critical to mission success, as the goal was not merely to damage the building, but to cause structural collapse and create conditions that would prevent the Gestapo from continuing operations. The planning for Operation Carthage consumed weeks of detailed preparation and analysis. Aerial reconnaissance photographs of Copenhagen, and specifically of Shell House, were obtained by high-flying reconnaissance aircraft and analyzed by photo interpreters who identified the exact location of the target building, its construction characteristics, surrounding structures, and potential obstacles to low-level approach and attack. The planners needed to determine the optimal attack direction that would allow aircraft to approach the target at very low altitude while minimizing exposure to anti-aircraft defenses and avoiding obstacles like church steeples, tall buildings, and other structures that posed collision hazards to aircraft flying at rooftop height. The route selected would bring the aircraft in from the northeast, flying across relatively open areas, before making the final approach to Shell House from a direction that provided clear sightlines to the target and reasonable escape routes after bomb release. The mission plan called for the attacking aircraft to be divided into 3 waves of 6 aircraft each. The first wave would attack the lower floors of the building, attempting to penetrate the structure and cause maximum damage to the ground and lower floors where most Gestapo operations were conducted. The second wave would attack slightly later, aiming their bombs at areas of the building not yet destroyed to ensure complete structural failure. The third wave would serve as a backup, attacking any portions of the building still standing or providing additional strikes if needed. This sequential approach ensured that even if early waves did not achieve complete destruction, follow-up attacks would finish the job. The timing between waves had to be carefully calculated to allow smoke and debris from earlier attacks to clear sufficiently for following aircraft to see their aiming points, while not providing so much time that German defenses could fully react or rescue operations could begin. The crews selected for Operation Carthage were among the most experienced Mosquito pilots and navigators in the 2nd Tactical Air Force. Low-level precision bombing required exceptional skill, split-second timing, and absolute nerve. The pilots would fly their aircraft at altitudes of 50 feet or less during the final approach to target, skimming over rooftops and streets at speeds exceeding 250 miles per hour. At these speeds and altitudes, any error in judgment, any moment of inattention, Any mechanical failure could result in immediate catastrophic crash. The margin for error was essentially zero. The navigators faced equally demanding requirements as they had to pinpoint the target in an urban environment where buildings and streets might look similar from low altitude, calculate the precise moment for bomb release based on aircraft speed and altitude, and execute the release sequence while the pilot maintained the aircraft in a position where the bombs would strike the intended target. On the morning of October 31st, 1944, the 18 Mosquitoes assigned to Operation Carthage took off from their bases in England and formed up for the flight across the North Sea to Denmark. The outbound flight was conducted at very low altitude to avoid detection by German radar installations along the coast, flying at wave-top height, sometimes only 50 feet above the water. The formation crossed the North Sea in radio silence, the crews knowing that their survival depended on surprise and that any warning to German defenses could result in heavy anti-aircraft fire or interception by fighters. The North Sea crossing, covering several hundred miles, required precise navigation to ensure the formation made landfall at the correct point on the Danish coast. Any navigational error could result in the formation arriving at the wrong location or alerting German defenses by crossing the coast at an unexpected point. The formation made landfall on the Danish coast at the planned location and continued inland toward Copenhagen at low altitude. The sight of 18 twin-engine aircraft flying in formation at rooftop height must have been dramatic and terrifying for Danish civilians who witnessed their passage. The aircraft followed the planned route, using landmarks, roads, and distinctive terrain features for navigation as they closed on Copenhagen from the northeast. The crews maintained strict radio discipline, communicating only when absolutely necessary to preserve surprise. Each pilot and navigator knew their role, knew the timing, knew what they had to do, and prepared mentally for the final attack run that would begin within minutes. As the formation approached Copenhagen, the first wave separated and began their attack run on Shell House. The 6 aircraft of the first wave dropped to minimum altitude, their pilots focused intently on identifying the target building among the urban landscape of central Copenhagen. The navigator bombardiers studied the terrain ahead, comparing what they saw through the Mosquito's perspex nose with reconnaissance photographs and maps they had memorized during mission briefings. Target identification at low altitude in an urban environment was extraordinarily difficult, as buildings that looked distinctive in vertical aerial photographs appeared very different when viewed from a nearly horizontal perspective while traveling at high speed. The lead aircraft of the first wave identified Shell House and began the final approach. The pilot held the aircraft steady at approximately 50 feet altitude, compensating for crosswinds and adjusting heading to aim directly at the target building. The navigator called out ranges and timings, his hand on the bomb release switch, waiting for the precise moment when release would ensure the bomb struck the target. At the calculated release point, the navigator pressed the bomb release and felt the aircraft lurch upward, slightly as 2,000 pounds of bombs dropped from the internal bomb bay. The pilot immediately initiated a climbing turn away from the target as the bombs, carried forward by the aircraft's speed, arced downward toward Shell House. Behind the lead aircraft, the other 5 Mosquitoes of the first wave executed their attacks in rapid succession, each crew duplicating the precise procedures that would place their bombs on target. The 500-pound bomb struck Shell House with devastating effect. The first bombs penetrated the building's facade and exploded inside, the blast waves shattering interior walls, collapsing floors and creating massive structural damage. Subsequent bombs struck the already damaged structure, each explosion adding to the destruction. The reinforced concrete construction of Shell House, intended to provide solid office space, became a liability as collapsing floors pancaked downward, crushing everything between them. Fires ignited immediately as explosive blasts ruptured gas lines, scattered burning debris, and ignited combustible materials throughout the building. The Gestapo officers and personnel working in the lower floors had no warning and no chance to escape. Many were killed instantly by blast effects, crushed by collapsing structures, or trapped in spaces that would quickly fill with smoke and fire. The second wave of mosquitoes arrived over the target approximately 2 minutes after the first wave's attack. By this time, Shell House was already heavily damaged, with portions of the structure collapsed, fires burning, and a pall of smoke rising from the wreckage. The crews of the second wave faced the additional challenge of attacking through smoke and dust that obscured their aiming points. Nevertheless, they pressed their attacks with the same precision as the first wave, adding their bombs to the destruction already inflicted. The cumulative effect of 2 waves of attacks, totaling 24,000 pounds of bombs delivered with extraordinary accuracy, essentially guaranteed the complete destruction of Shell House as a functional building and the elimination of Gestapo operations in that location. The third wave, arriving to find the target already devastated, made the decision to withhold some of their attacks, as dropping additional bombs on the rubble would serve no military purpose and might only increase collateral damage to surrounding buildings. Some aircraft of the third wave dropped their bombs on alternate targets or returned to base with weapons still aboard, a decision that reflected the professionalism and discipline of the crews who prioritized mission objectives over simply expending their weapons. The attack on Shell House achieved its primary objectives with remarkable success. The building was completely destroyed, with large portions of the structure collapsed into rubble. The Gestapo personnel working in the building suffered heavy casualties, with dozens killed in the attack and many more injured or trapped in the wreckage. The Gestapo's intelligence files, representing years of accumulated information on the Danish resistance, were destroyed in the fires that consumed the building. The operational capability of the Gestapo in Denmark was severely disrupted, requiring months to reconstitute their organization and forcing them to relocate to other facilities that lacked the centralized organization of Shell House. Most remarkably, a significant number of the Danish resistance fighters imprisoned on the top floor of Shell House survived the attack and escaped. The destruction of the lower floors of the building created chaos that allowed some prisoners to break free from their cells and flee the burning structure. The precision of the attack, which concentrated bomb impacts on the lower floors while the top floor prisoners were located higher in the building, gave these men and women a chance at survival that they would not have had in a less precise attack. While exact numbers are difficult to verify due to the confusion of the moment and the subsequent Nazi attempts to recapture escapees, historical accounts indicate that a substantial number of resistance prisoners successfully escaped and returned to the underground network. However, the operation was not without tragedy. One of the mosquitoes in the attacking force suffered a mechanical problem or was struck by defensive fire during the low-level approach and crashed into a building adjacent to Shell House. This building, tragically, was a school where children were attending classes. The crash and resulting fire killed a number of children and teachers, a devastating civilian casualty toll that overshadowed the military success of the operation. Additionally, some bombs missed their intended target and struck neighboring buildings, causing civilian casualties and damage to structures that had no connection to German military operations. These civilian deaths and injuries represented the terrible cost of warfare in urban environments, where even the most precisely planned and executed operations can result in unintended consequences. The immediate aftermath of the attack saw frantic rescue efforts as Danish firefighters and civilians attempted to rescue survivors from Shell House and from the damaged surrounding buildings, including the school. The German authorities imposed security cordons around the area and began the grim task of recovering bodies and searching for any intelligence materials that might have survived the fires. The Danish resistance, while mourning the civilian casualties, recognized the destruction of Shell House represented a significant victory that disrupted Gestapo operations and freed imprisoned comrades. The psychological impact on both the resistance and the occupation authorities was substantial. The resistance gained confidence from the demonstration that British forces were willing and able to conduct precision strikes in support of their operations. The Gestapo and German occupation authorities were forced to recognize their vulnerability and the increasing capability of Allied forces to strike targets previously considered secure. The aircraft and crews that executed Operation Carthage returned to their bases in England, having completed one of the most challenging precision bombing missions of the war. The success of the attack validated the Mosquito concept and demonstrated what could be achieved when advanced aircraft technology was combined with skilled crews, detailed planning, and accurate intelligence. The mission became a case study in precision bombing and was analyzed by military planners for lessons applicable to future operations. The broader strategic context of Operation Carthage fits within the Allied campaign to support resistance movements throughout occupied Europe and to disrupt German security operations that threatened these resistance networks. Similar operations were conducted against Gestapo facilities in other occupied countries, though few achieved the precision and limited collateral damage of the Copenhagen attack. The willingness of British forces to conduct such high-risk operations in support of resistance movements reflected both the strategic value placed on these underground networks and the moral obligation felt by Allied leaders to support those who risked everything to oppose Nazi occupation. In the months following the Shell House attack, the Gestapo attempted to reconstitute their operations in Denmark, but they never regained the organizational effectiveness and centralized intelligence capabilities they had possessed before the raid. The destruction of their files represented an intelligence loss that could not be replaced, as the information had been accumulated over years through interrogations, surveillance, and informant reports. The disruption to Gestapo operations came at a critical time, as the Allied victory in Europe was becoming increasingly inevitable, and resistance movements throughout occupied territories were preparing for the final phase of operations that would support the Allied advance and facilitate liberation. Denmark was liberated in May 1945 following Germany's surrender, and the Danish people could finally emerge from 5 years of occupation. The resistance members who had survived Gestapo imprisonment, torture, and the dangers of underground operations could take satisfaction in knowing that their courage and sacrifice had contributed to Denmark's liberation and to the Allied victory. The memory of Operation Carthage remained complex, celebrated for its precision and its success in disrupting Gestapo operations, while mourned for the innocent lives lost when one aircraft crashed into the school. The operation demonstrated both the capabilities and the limitations of precision bombing as it existed in 1944. The Mosquito aircraft, flown by skilled crews with detailed intelligence and careful planning, could deliver weapons with unprecedented accuracy, striking specific buildings in urban environments, with minimal damage to surrounding structures. However, even with these capabilities, the risks of collateral damage remained high, and any operational error or mechanical failure could result in civilian casualties. The ethical questions raised by conducting military operations in populated areas where civilians might be killed were not easily resolved, then or now, but the decision-makers who approved Operation Carthage believed that the military benefits and the potential to free imprisoned resistance fighters justified the risks. Operation Carthage stands as a testament to the courage of the Mosquito crews who flew the mission, to the Danish resistance fighters who endured Gestapo imprisonment, and to the civilians who supported the resistance, despite the terrible risks. It represents a moment when precision aerial warfare achieved its intended objectives, while highlighting the moral complexities and tragic costs that accompany all military operations in populated areas.